Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I have spinning around in front of me today is a United States Marine, and what I'm pretty certain is the current uniform. I've had a few questions recently about marine pattern or MARPAT camouflage, and digital camouflage tends to be quite a tricky one to try and manage on our miniatures because of course we've got brushes rather than templates at these sorts of scales. So how do you get that look and make it look kinda close without painting every individual dot? Well, now this uses surprisingly few paints and they will all be listed in the description. So keeping it nice and quick, let's get started. So once your miniature is assembled, no matter where it is it's come from, it's time to go ahead and prime him. Now here I've used skeleton bone from the Army Painter. It doesn't matter too much what you use here. I would suggest something maybe a little warm and quite light, so a bone color of some description is going to be perfect, but you could just as easily use a white. The first thing I'm going to do is grab a little bit here of agate skin and just paint in a little bit that's visible of his face. This will cover quite well, but as always you want just a tiny bit of water in your paint, and don't worry too much if you do hit his glasses or his straps and what have you, because we're going to paint those another color later. And just before we get started on his uniform, there's a few straps and what have you which will be easier to paint now. So what I have is necrotic flesh, and this is a good, very light green, kind of an old school canvas color. Just paint in any of the straps that you need to with this. I've seen these done in all sorts of different colors, but beiges and greens are by far the most common. So now at this point we're going to start laying down the base color for his uniform. And this is where a little bit of personal preference is going to come into play. What I would suggest here, this is Command Khaki. And honestly, when you are painting camouflage at this sort of scale, we don't actually want it to work properly. If you do go ahead, you paint perfect camouflage on a miniature, what's going to happen is that the details on this guy are going to disappear at range. You won't see him properly on the table. So instead we're going to go slightly impressionist. As well, generally speaking, it's a good idea to go slightly lighter with your colors than would be strictly realistic, because first of all we're going to shade them, and secondly there's a wonderful effect in scale modeling called scale fade, where if you apply the same color that you would apply on a full-sized uniform or tank or what have you, it's going to look super dark. And the reason for that is because there is less light interacting with this smaller figure, so the color looks off, it looks too dark. Wee bit of a physics lesson while we're painting this. I'm going to swap to a smaller brush as I come up around his collar, but for the most part, just jam this on. Don't worry about hitting his equipment. Now we can start applying our camo pattern. Now what I'm going to use for this is a flat-edged brush, but you'll see it's not terribly, it's a little bit scraggly, and that's ideal. What we don't want is perfect straight lines. We do want a bit of randomness. Like I said, scraggly is good here. So I've got a little bit, this is camouflage green on my brush, and then over here, just on a bit of ordinary paper, I'm going to dab it off until I'm leaving behind funky little splotchy patches. Then I'll start dabbing until I get kind of a rough green pattern here. Now the patterns on the MARPAT tend to be mostly horizontal, which is why a brush like this works rather well. And don't worry if you end up with some big splotches, because we have got the black to go on afterwards. But you want to cover maybe a third to half of the uniform with this camouflage green. Just keep it rough, keep it splodgy, and if you can, keep the lines mostly horizontal. Likewise, it also doesn't have to be a flat-edged brush. It can be an old, I used to use this to apply snow effects. You can just grab a little bit of this. The important thing is that it's going to be something which leaves you an uneven, scratchy edge to things. Now this can be a bit tricky, especially because you're working with a three-dimensional object. So me saying go horizontally is easier said than done sometimes. But keep your eyes on a color swatch or even off of a photo, and that'll help you get some ideas for how to approach it. If you need to, you can go down to an ordinary brush, just dab on little additions where you want them, bearing in mind to keep them relatively small, and again, just little scratchy outlines. If you need to, you can even go back to your command Khaki and do the same. Touch up with an ordinary brush, just dab in little spots with an ordinary brush to break up if you end up with any big blotches of the green that you don't like the shape of. Now we want to start adding the black bits. And typically this would be, again, about a third of the color on the uniform, but in our miniature, if we add that much, it's going to very quickly overpower what we're doing. So I've got here some Ironclad gray, and I've watered this down till it's quite thin. You see, I just want a tiny amount on my brush at a time. If you're worried about your brush control and how it's going to flow, just tattoo with it for a second on your base, get an idea for how you're going to leave things behind. So once I'm satisfied with the flow there, it's time to start panicking and just add a few little bits of black. You want to cross areas where green meets brown, so you're sort of tying them together without completely enveloping them both. Now this will take a little bit of time. It's a bit fussy, but it's not too difficult to do as long as you bear in mind, keep your paint thin, keep the tip on your brush, and don't rush it. And just as I'm going around, what I tend to find easiest is to pick the edge where brown meets green and draw, first of all, just a little dibbly line, and then a dot or two either side of it, and then up somewhere close by another couple of random dots. So don't always paint complete lines. You don't always want to follow the same pattern either, but you'll find this does help. If you're worried about how random it's going to look, just follow that, a line and then a couple of dots. You'll keep your camo looking relatively reasonable. Now that can be a little nerve-wracking, but remember we are looking to create the idea of the camo rather than recreating it perfectly. And I think that's going to look fine on the table. What we're going to do now though is continue using that Ironclad grey, and anything which would be painted in black, we're now going to do that. So his weapon, his gloves, his glasses if he's wearing them. Go ahead with this stuff now. Now blessedly things speed up a bit at this point, because what I have is desert yellow, and wonderfully all of his personal equipment is the same color. So I'm going to use here, this is a size 2 brush for most of these larger areas, and then when I need to, I'll swap down to a smaller one to get the littler bits. Now his boots, they are a very similar color, though they always look a little bit lighter to me in photographs. So I'm going to use here Wasteland clay for these. Now, the last thing that I'm going to do is the cover on his goggles. Now this is Urban Buff I'm using. This little cover tends to be quite light from what I've seen in photographs. And again, remembering that we are going slightly lighter on our miniature, because we've still got to shade them and we want them to look right at scale. Now once I'm finished with this, I'm going to go cruise around and just do any last little bits of tidy up that I need to, and then he'll be ready for shading. Now there was a little lie, I did use some true copper on the exposed rounds going out of his magazine there. But what I've mixed up next to shade him, this is actually a variation on an old army painted trick from the Forge World team. This ended up with the nickname Marine Juice, so it's kind of appropriate, we're painting a marine with it. This one is the Army Painter specifically recipe. And what I've got here, this is equal parts of Speedpaint Medium, Dark Tone, and it is the Warm Skin Shade from the Blanche paint set. Now the reason why I'm using this rather than just Strong Tone or something similar is that it is dark enough, as you see, to give us plenty of shading, but the amount of medium that we've added to it as well means that it's not going to stain any of the flatter areas all that much. So what we have in essence is a shade which is a little bit warm without being red, it's a little bit brown without just being grimy, and it's dark enough that we still get the effect we want with our shading. So over everything, And once we've done that, we'll give them about half an hour to dry somewhere nice and sunny and see what we end up with. And once that has dried, with a bit of luck, we'll have something that looks like this. Now, you'll see we've got tons of shading, but it hasn't overpowered the colors any. The one big thing I'd point out is that at this stage, if you do prefer a darker brown in the camo mix, I'll probably just use Paratrooper Tan instead. But once we put this guy out at arm's length, I think that's still going to look more accurate as it is. Matter of personal choice, but that's what painting's all about. Now, because the Marine's personal equipment just has so much raised detail on it, it's perfect for dry brushing. So what I've got here is a little bit of Barren Dune and one of these small dry brushes from the Army Painter, because the wedge tip is going to come in pretty handy here. So just lightly along the edges of the detail. And we'll brighten up his personal equipment, just going around with this. If you do end up getting a little bit of this onto his uniform, don't worry, it's near enough the perfect color for it anyway. Now that's going to add a ton of definition for very, very little extra work. Well worth doing. What I am going to do is go back to a little bit of that Ironclad grey, which I still had on my palette. I'm just going to paint in the cross on his pack. I've seen this ordinarily is done in black. Now, obviously, one doesn't want a great big red cross on their hip. There's not actually a huge amount to do to him, really. What I've got here is some Barbarian flesh, and I'm going to pop just a little bit on the tip of his nose and on his cheekbones, well, on the top of his lip, let's say, just to accentuate some of the shape of his face. Now at this stage you could highlight his gloves with maybe a slightly lighter grey, but I don't think we really need to. What I am going to do though, before our finishing touch, is to take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish. You'll see quite a big difference in the finish there. Now that's going to make a world of difference to your finish there. The final step is to grab yourself an old pencil. This is a 2B. The softer the better, I tend to find. What we'll do is to use this to buff along the edges of some of the weapon to give us a used metallic sort of finish without having to paint it on. Now the more of this that you add, the brighter and shinier it is going to look. So once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is go ahead and pop his base on him, and it's going to be a super simple one. The recipe for that will be in the description. So let's get a look at our Marine here when he is all finished. And so, there at last, our Marine is complete. And I have to admit, I'm actually quite happy with that result. Like I said, it isn't necessarily easy, but it is simple. And once you've had a bit of practice getting those little dots off the end of your brush, I think you'll find it a much simpler method. I quite like how that looks. In particular, it was quite fun to pop a little bit of actual marine juice onto a real marine, so I can chalk that up to experience now. Quite enjoyed that. The one last thing that I did do was to pop a little bit of gloss varnish on his Oakleys. So if you see him spinning around and his glasses are shining, that is why. So as always, thanks go out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and importantly in this case, resin. And that includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Mean it every time. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked down there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and good night, Chesty, wherever you are.